This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Welcome to today's meeting of the Planning and Regeneration Committee. Thank you for joining us today as we look at how the design of London's buildings shapes the city's future. We'll be talking about what makes buildings high quality, beautiful and sustainable, and how planning frameworks influence those outcomes. We'll explore what the evidence tells us about London's design preferences and ask whether new developments are really reflecting those aspirations. The aim of this investigation is to determine practical steps to create places that genuinely improve quality of life, while considering how Londoners' voices are heard in shaping these outcomes and whether some perspectives are missing. Before we get started, I would like to remind everyone to please switch their mobile phones to silent mode. I also ask that members and guests position their electronic devices away from the microphones. Please adjust your microphones so you can be heard clearly, and remember to lift them from the base if needed. Members of the public are encouraged to follow @London Assembly on various social media platforms. When using X, please include the hashtag Assembly Planning for this meeting. Before we begin, we have a few items of business to attend to. Can I now ask our committee clerk, Sal Fazal, to confirm any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. No apologies for absence have been received.
Can I ask the committee to note the recommendation set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Can I ask the committee to note the completed and ongoing actions arriving from its previous meetings? Noted. We now move to our main item of business, a discussion on how Londoners can get involved in the design of buildings and the future built environment of the capital. We have structured our meeting into 2 panels, and I would like to welcome our guests for the first panel. In the chamber, we have Lucy Bush, Director of Research and Participation at Demos, Robert Kerr, Design Director at Adam Architecture, Robert Quolek, Senior Architectural Designer and Project Manager at Create Streets, and Dr. Saffron Woodcraft, Faculty Lead for Public Policy, UCL Bartlett School. We will now progress to our questions. The first question will be asked by me and is to all of you. And it is, what does the evidence tell us about the type of design of buildings and housing that Londoners want to see built in the capital? We'll start with Lucy and then move across the panel.
Hello, thank you for inviting me along today. I actually don't have any specific facts or figures to that particular question. I think that's probably better suited to some of my other panellists. But my opening statement would be that I think there is great appetite to be involved. I think that currently people are not brought into the placemaking process enough, and I think that has a detrimental impact not only on the quality and the look and feel of new buildings, but also on people's sense of citizenship and belonging longer term. We have large numbers of people. 76% of people say that that people need to be given a greater amount of decision making over new development in their area, but we have a majority, about 67% of people, saying that they feel absolutely powerless when it comes to decisions that are made around new development coming into their local area. So I'm sure my panellists will have more detail on sort of the specifics of Londoners' design preferences, but just as an opening statement from me, I'd say there's appetite there and it's currently not being met.
Thank you very much. I think I'd like Lucy know that Robert has done a lot of research into specific trends, but again, my opening position would be, I think looking at this across the breadth of London, it's very tempting to perhaps be drawn to certain typologies of building, but actually ultimately it's the inclusivity across the rich tapestry that is the city. And in terms of those types of building, again, one can look at the market trends and see where popularity of what sells. It's always an interesting part of the argument that goes forward. But ultimately, the places which people enjoy most have got a natural variety to the built environment that they're within. It's avoiding the sort of monoculture of design. It's avoiding types of building. And ultimately, if we are going to build great places, it needs to have that integrated and holistic approach to all the multifaceted elements of design.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Well, I suppose because it's a big question, and we have done a lot of research on these sort of things, so I will say a few points, but then do feel free to ask about greater detail later on. I'll start by saying, though, that Create Streets has done a lot of visual preference surveys, a lot of engagement with both Londoners and in the UK generally and abroad. So some of our experience is London-specific. Some of it is just kind of more general preferences that people have for buildings. But something that we do see is that about 70 to 80% of people do reach broad agreement about design preferences. That doesn't mean that we can always predict exactly what people will like or what they don't like, but what you do find is that there is broad agreement about some of the key points. Some of those include facades with variety and a pattern. So what is that? If you think about a traditional terrace, even over time, if someone's updated their home and one home no longer looks exactly like the neighbor, they still look of a similar pattern. And if you have a street which, say, is designed with similar design principles, then you will still have a kind of certain pattern that you can identify along the street. Windows of similar proportions, doors which have a rhythm, windows of similar styles. And so you have the kind of harmony that perhaps you don't find with newer developments where one building might look completely different from another, and the whole effect is quite disharmonious. And then we've done a lot of kind of research as well. A lot of it is published in publications that we've done over the years, some of which I have with me. I'd be happy to share the links to those publications afterwards. But in one of them, publication NIMBY to YIMBY, Create Streets asked people to choose between different development patterns, and most people picked gentle density. Those are terraces, mansion blocks, mews, and well-defined streets. And these are the kind of forms that most people said they would prefer to live in, or that they would prefer to see built near to them. And then of streets and squares, people almost universally said that they prefer buildings with coherent frontages, clear block structures, human-scaled heights, usually 4 to 6 stories, and active overlook streets. So a lot of the research that we do, it varies. Some of it is about building form. Some of it is about the way that buildings look. Yeah, but it really does vary. And then I'll point to a couple of recent visual preference surveys that we've done just in the past year. So we did one about the Marks and Spencer, which I'm sure all of us know. That's the Oxford Street redevelopment. Marks and Spencer had put forward a proposal of demolishing the existing building, Orchard House, and replacing it with a much larger, very kind of modern building with a lot of glass. We weren't fans of that proposal. We think that the existing Orchard House has a lot of merit. It's a building which is kind of quite characteristic of what we felt Oxford Street was. And so we asked our architect friend Francis Terry to put forward a proposal of his own to extend and enlarge the existing building. The building footprint was more or less the same between Francis Terry's proposal and Marks and Spencer's proposal, and we put that to a public vote. Now, this was conducted by a Delta Poll, which is a national polling company, and they asked people both in the UK, and then there was a separate tranche of just Londoners for that study, and the proposal by Francis Terry got 79% support, while the Marks and Spencer proposal had 17% support from the general public. And I think that was quite telling, but it didn't surprise us because we'd done so many of these before that we could always kind of predict that it would be 70 to 80%. Finally, I'll just note our Shortage Works visual preference survey. So we did this actually for a developer for a new development in Hackney on the edge of the City of London. We'd been working with this developer on this project for a couple of months, and there were, as they presented to us and reading the planning documentation, I think there were concerns among some Hackney planning officials that the buildings would be too great in scale and that there would be a lot of public opposition just because of the scale of the building. So we did a visual preference survey, the exact same angles as the existing condition, which had mainly low-rise buildings, and then the proposal, which had a range kind of from gentle density buildings of 6, 7, 8 stories up to a tower element. And despite that, the support was overwhelmingly in favor of the new proposal. There are a lot of reasons for that, but I think the kind of, to summarize it, is just because the new buildings were much nicer than what was there before. And even if the height is greater, people do want buildings that are nicer. They want to see their areas improve, and nice architecture can overcome even concerns about height. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you very much. Just before we progress on to Saffron, on the Marks and Spencer's case, did you find any difference in the polling between Londoners and the rest of the people in the UK?
Well, with all our polling, we always we did years ago assume that there would be differences, but they tend to be very minor. It was I can pull up the numbers right now. It was a very minimal difference, and not just among Londoners and non-Londoners, but you see pretty much equal support depending on age, political voting patterns, whether Labour, Conservative, Liberal, Democrat, etc. It's it's within a few percentage points difference. So in London, support for, and this is for one pair of the images, it was 75% support in London compared to 79% in the rest of the South, 76% in the Midlands, 73% in the North, 73% in Wales, 75% in Scotland, and 78% in Northern Ireland. So more or less the same. One of the other pairs, 71% support in London and 77% support in London for the third pair. So within a couple of percentage points with other parts of the UK.
Yeah, so consistent across regions and nations of the UK. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thanks very much for the invitation to contribute to this conversation. So the piece of evidence that I'm going to draw on primarily is a longitudinal study that's looking at the impacts of regeneration on neighbourhoods in East London. It's a 10-year study. We're 3 years in. It's looking at the prosperity gains from regeneration, so who benefits and how they benefit, in 15 areas around 4 kind of major regeneration sites, one of which is the Royal Docks. Here, so it draws on a survey of 4,000 households plus qualitative research. So that research doesn't explicitly ask questions about design preferences. It's investigating this question about, what are the benefits from regen and how are they distributed spatially among different neighbourhoods, but also looking at socio-economic demographic distribution as well. But it does raise some points that I think are relevant to this conversation, partly about what people want to see in terms of affordability, and that won't be any surprise to you at all, that genuinely affordable housing, so housing at social rents, is something that people want to see and feel are not seeing enough of. But from a design perspective, a couple of issues arise in all of the different places that we're working, and one is about the materials that are used in new build and regeneration, and the kind of sensory responses people have to the transformation of the neighbourhoods that they're living in. So this study obviously has been running for 3 years, but I've been looking at this question for about 20, and something that keeps recurring in our research is the fact that regeneration at scale doesn't make people feel like they belong, essentially. So if you're looking at the regeneration of areas like this one, where you've got kind of long-term established communities, such as those around Custom House, and then you have a very different style of architecture and regeneration right next to it. Often people feel that kind of clash and the visual kind of clash that they're seeing makes them feel kind of dislocated from the places that they're in. There's a really interesting conversation to be had around brick in relation to that, which I will perhaps refer back to Robert. But I think that sense that, transformation doesn't always bring people along, and the visual realm and the design choices have a key part to play in that. But then the other aspect of that argument that we hear frequently is about social infrastructure. So the types of social infrastructure that are both removed in the process of regeneration. So, low-cost cafes, affordable spaces, affordable community centres, which are replaced with new spaces in regenerated sites that are not accessible or affordable in the same way. So I think there are design and planning and kind of financial sustainability questions around how that social infrastructure can be provided. I agree with Lucy. I don't have specific evidence about, I don't have statistics to quote about the number of people who feel either included or excluded from design and regeneration kind of planning processes, but I know that there's a very strong demand from communities to have a meaningful voice in design choices and in the planning process. So going beyond engagement, going beyond consultation, and I think the question of mechanisms, research mechanisms for how that might be done is going to come up later on. So I will perhaps just end my comments here.
Thank you all very much. Assemblymember Lord Bailey.
Very quick question. Did Marks and Spencer's take on the more preferred design?
They did not. It was a complicated planning kind of process. The building was called in by the Secretary of State. Then there was the election, and then several months later, the Secretary of State at the time gave planning permission to Marks and Spencer's to continue with their existing design proposal.
Back to you, Chair.
Assemblymember Boff.
You're saying, I think you're being quite precious about what trying to analyse what the public like and don't like, or rather what the public like. It's quite clear what they don't like in design, isn't it?
Is that question directed towards me? I'm happy to go first. Here I'll rely also on engagement that we do outside of visual preference surveys, because we do a lot of in-person engagement as well, not just, actually mainly outside of London. And you're right that people do seem to have the strongest opinions about what they don't like, particularly because most people don't support new development in their area. But here I will point to one study that we did. This was a 2015 study that we did with Ipsos Mori. So it's about 10 years old, but I think it's just as relevant now as ever. We showed members of the public 5 different buildings ranging from traditional styles to contemporary styles. Some of the contemporary styles had even won awards. However, the public did not seem to agree with the award-winning buildings. So the 2 most traditional buildings in form, style, and materials in the study got 79 and 77 support, bless you, from the public. The less conventional, more innovative buildings, one of which had won an award, had 37 and 54% support. And quite an interesting follow-up question, we asked people if they would support those buildings being built in their local area. Among the 14% who opposed building in principle at the beginning, half changed their minds for the 2 most popular options. So there is definitely an argument as well to be made for, from that publication I mentioned, from NIMBY to YIMBY. Based on this study, you can certainly draw the conclusion that you can turn NIMBYs into YIMBYs if people just don't dislike the buildings being proposed. But yeah, I mentioned that we do a lot of engagement outside of London as well, and just speaking to people, one of the main comments that you do hear is that people want buildings to reflect a sense of place. They want buildings that fit in. I don't think it should be surprising that most people don't want a neighboring building that screams for attention. I think most of us just do want polite neighbors, and you certainly see that with the conversations that we have with people. But you are right. People are much more kind of aggressive in their views about the things they don't like. But once you show pictures, and I always like to say that pictures speak 1,000 words. When you show people pictures and you ask quite a simple question, do you like this building or do you not like this building, or do you prefer this building or that building, people's views are pretty clear.
People tend to like the sort of, from what you're saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong, people tend to like the look of traditional buildings, but they're open to persuasion. Would that be a fair thing to say? If consulted, if included?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes. People do tend to prefer traditional buildings, sorry, I'll pass it on to Lucy momentarily.
Yeah.
But it has really a lot to do with just because traditional buildings tend to have the sort of features that people are interested in. Nice materials, some kind of ornament, variety in a pattern. You can get those same features with modern buildings, but we just tend not to see those kind of buildings being built.
Ms. Bush.
Thank you. I don't disagree with any of the data that you're presenting, but just to sort of put forward another side, I think that actually people can love all kinds of buildings that look very different from one another and that serve very different purposes. The one that comes to mind is actually in Southwark, the old Aylesbury estate, which is being sort of regenerated, as I'm sure you're all aware, over many years. And moving some of the people out of their old flats in that estate has been a very long and difficult process because people love those places they live because they're home to them.
Is it because they love where they live, or they're not sure they're going to love where they're going to move to?
Very possibly, it's also that. But what I suppose I'm trying to say is that people can love all types of buildings and feel strong attachment and strong affection towards lots of different types of buildings, and that this sense of ownership and belonging and control influence over the places that your home and the neighbourhood that you live in can often have an outsized impact on the feelings that you have towards a building. It's not purely the aesthetics. And there's one particular regeneration project that I just want to draw attention to, which is Mark Lake Court in Bermondsey. The residents moved in a number of years ago now, I think around 2018. But that was brought about through a co-design process with existing residents and new residents. And if you look at the building, I mean, sort of personal preferences aside, it's fine. And certainly the residents did make some material decisions about the material, about the way that the building ended up looking. But more than that, because they were part of the process and brought into that conversation, the testimonials that I've read from that case study are that people were genuinely really excited to move into that new block, that it felt like it was integrated into the existing estate, and that part of the value of that new development was actually facilitating downsizing older residents in the existing social housing block, moving into downsizing into one-bed flats in Mark Lake Court and opening up larger properties on the social housing list, and sort of getting people genuinely excited because they've been part of that process.
At the risk of trampling on somebody else's question, I hope I don't, is that you said co-design, not just consultation.
Yeah.
And there's a massive difference, isn't there?
Yes. It's a much deeper form of engagement, really kind of bringing people into that process as equals very early on in the process and over a kind of a number of sessions. I'm sure we can talk about that more.
Because it isn't just about traditionally pastiche-looking properties. It's properties, is it not, that fulfil those criteria. Let's take, for example, Bedshead in South London, which I think is just a fantastic development. There's no way you could call that pastiche. It's a very complicated development, but it meets those criteria. Do you feel that's the important thing, rather than just going for sticking a new frontage on that looks like it's Georgian? Mr. Kerr. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It might be sort of surprising as a practice that specialises in traditional architecture to say the following, but I would agree with you. I don't think it does need to be just a traditional facade. I mean, ultimately, so much of what Robert's talked about in those categories, what we find makes for successful places is about scale. It is about giving a sense of human scale and community. A community can come if you may not have the ability to put mixed use in there. It might come from the engagement. It probably more likely comes from the space between the buildings. And actually, I think it's very tempting to look at the design of the elevations about what's going on, but actually it's the intimacy and scale that you can create or generate by good streetscapes. And I mean that in terms of, is this a street which is a terrace and much denser how are you using trees within there? Thinking about those setbacks, are you going to create meaningful front gardens, or actually is it better just to have a much tighter urban environment which is safe for people to be in? And I think it's very tempting to get down a rabbit hole of an argument that's probably, thankfully, I think, on the way out of the modernism versus traditionalism. It's certainly amongst my generation, it's less of that sort of debate that's going on. It has roared and raged far too much over the past generations, but it's about providing homes which can engender an ability to know your neighbours and bring people together as much as anything else. That does come down to just getting the quality right, of getting the quality of build, getting the quality of streetscape and uses altogether.
Thank you. Dr. Wooker.
Thank you. So I just wanted to refer back to a point that Lucy was commenting on about the Aylesbury estate. So I was involved in some research in the Aylesbury estate about a decade ago. And one of the key things that emerged from that was that one of the things that was really important to people's sense of home and sense of attachment on the Aylesbury in say, design circumstances that were less than perfect, from a kind of management perspective, was about the importance of social infrastructure. So it was not only the scale and the streetscape, it was about being part of a community that had affordable childcare, that had, community centres and health centres that were accessible, not in beautiful buildings, but accessible to the local community, and food, a whole variety of food and kind of independent shops in that area that made it possible for people who were on, low incomes and in insecure work to make a living and stay in the neighbourhood. So I think from a design perspective, they were not living in houses that were perfect at that time. And whether or not people were feeling comfortable about living in different houses while their homes were while new homes were being constructed, and how they felt about coming back was not just about the design. It was about that kind of broader social infrastructure. And I think there's a really important design consideration here, which is about making sure that there's space within regeneration for affordable social infrastructure to have a place.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Dr. Woodcraft, how much of the design process and people's willingness to accept it do you think is driven by how they're consulted? Because I've lived on an estate. When they redid our estate, it was going horrifically until we were consulted, because people actually believed they were going to be coming back. And we'd accept any design, really, if it had a little bit more space than we were leaving, as it were, because that design process actually was about convincing us that we would be coming back. And then it meant that we were able to talk about some quite radical designs because of that process. How important is that? Or did I imagine all that?
I would say that's incredibly important, and that what is really critical is that people are not engaged or consulted, but brought into a decision-making process that's meaningful from the earliest possible stage when you're talking about planning or master planning or design. From my experience, I've been involved in some very difficult kind of community-based research projects, which are about people having to make very difficult choices about whether they want to stay living on an estate or not. But having a conversation where there is a space for kind of long-term and meaningful conversations to go on between residents and housing associations or planners or whoever is involved in that regeneration process, and to get to a point where it's possible to build trust and have really frank conversations, means that then you can get to the position where you're able to make trade-offs. You can have a meaningful conversation about, is it more important from a community perspective to have, this public space over here, or is it more important to have, community infrastructure in a community centre, or actually what we really want, is it just more affordable housing? So you've got to have a meaningful kind of you've got to have a meaningful dialogue as opposed to consultation or participation to get to those, to get to that situation, I would say.
But to what extent does design and the consultation period change the cost? Because that's the important thing, isn't it? It's very easy to go to community and say, yeah, let's do this and the other. What happens when they start making expensive design requests? What happens then?
There's always going to be a balance of feasibility within any commercial transaction, but I don't necessarily think that seeing things... I think it's a point I think I wanted to come on to in a future question, but just briefly, I think it's taking the horizon on where those costs are is a really important part of that. It may seem very expensive on day one, but actually, if you are going to make meaningful design interventions, creating communities don't happen as soon as you get your planning permission or you've finished the last building. It takes real time and commitment to do it. And the success of the Aylesbury estate, the success of these really wonderful schemes in London, and actually across the country, are where there is a longer-term process that happens afterwards. So, yes, you may say, I would like to have the long list of things to have, but you can often work within that and set up a framework which can come down the line with those.
If I could just add to that, I think it's incredibly important that the consultation or the engagement, where you bring the community into these conversations, is where what's on the table for discussion is really clear, where the question that you're asking them is really clear, and that the kinds of decisions that you want them to be making or informing are set out from the start, because there's a real risk if you bring people into a process and sort of say you can make all these decisions and you're the ones that are going to be deciding X and Y, and actually that's not the case at all. The result is even worse than if you had not invited them in the first place. Their trust will just crash through the floor. So I think it's about bringing to that conversation the right question and bringing everybody into that conversation and understanding what genuine power they have. And I think then just to pick up on Saffron's point, that when you actually get that process going, bringing people into making those difficult decisions and really deliberating on the trade-offs is an incredibly powerful exercise, because you're then creating ownership of those trade-offs and those challenges, and that the final outcomes from those decisions are owned by the community in a completely different way. Those decisions are made elsewhere and done to that community. And just to go right back to the point we were making at the beginning about sort of the importance of belonging and participation in and the impact that has on your feelings towards a place, your feelings of affection and love towards a place where you can call home. That's absolutely critical. So I think that's all part of the same process.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I'd certainly echo Lucy's point as well, that you do need to set kind of goalposts for what people can comment on. We were working with the Riverside Youth Club in Deptford a few years ago, and we held a workshop with youth members, and the kids had really excellent ideas. A pool on the roof, a new basketball court. Obviously, that wasn't within the realm of possibility within the budget. So, we had to tell them that we're discussing about this, and this, not pie in the sky ideas. But people do understand that. So I think as long as you kind of are quite clear about what you can comment on and what is within the realm of possibility, people are very understanding about that. And I think one of the wider points as well is that co-design is extremely important. One of the things people hate most of all is the feeling that that development is being done at them. People definitely want to feel part of the process, and I think that is crucial. That it's as early as possible, rather than just sort of like a box-ticking exercise at the very end of the process, which often, unfortunately, tends to happen.
Assemblymember Garbutt.
Thank you. Maybe I'll start with Lucy, because you've already mentioned how recent polling has shown that design of new development in London is not meeting public preferences. So I just wondered if you could speak a bit more to why you think that is and if there's any demographic variation in that. Thanks.
Thanks. I don't actually have any specific London-specific data on that. I don't know if maybe, I feel like maybe your data speaks more to the preferences. Yeah, I'm not sure that I have anything specific on London.
Sorry, I thought you mentioned something in your intro that would speak to that. But yeah, if anyone else is...
I've got some polling that I've been looking at recently, which talks to basically that kind of that disparity between the appetite to get involved in decisions about development and decisions in the local area compared to what the actual reality is, which is that people feel very powerless to get involved. And that's national polling, so not London specific, but I'm sure that the picture is the same in the capital.
Yeah, and this is about specifically how the design of new development isn't meeting public preference. So is that something that you can speak to?
Yeah, well...
And if there's any I'm interested if there's any demographic, because we're talking kind of broadly about people's perspectives, and I just wondered if there's any kind of variation around demographics within that.
Well, I guess I could point back to the shortage work study that we did, which did have quite a lot of demographic data, and then I can make a more general point afterwards. So within the study, we have data about gender, age, generation, region, social grade, and annual household income. And similarly to James's question earlier about how strong the London views were compared to outside of London, you don't see a huge difference in these categories. So again, just to take the first pair as an example, among males, preference was 75%, 77% among females. In the 18 to 24 group, it was 81%. Then 25 to 34 was 77%, 35 to 54, 75%, 55 to 64, 83%, and then 65 plus 70%. And they're more or less similar for other groups. Looking at voting intention, so again, to take the first pair as an example, just for consistency.
It's fine. We can have a look at that after the meeting. But yeah, I guess it's that general point of how does that chime with you, and what do you believe is the case around people not being supportive of kind of new development in London? Is that something that you could, that you've looked at?
Not specifically. So I don't know. Maybe I'll let some of the other panelists try to get to that question, but not specifically in terms of the London-specific NIMBY-YIMBY argument. We have examples from outside of London, but not within London specifically.
And to follow up on the conversation that was happening earlier around kind of cost pressures and those decisions that are being made when, for example, Londoners come forward with different preferences. Are there other kind of trade-offs that happen within the decision-making process around cost pressures that make kind of different designs more feasible? Does anyone want to talk to? Yeah.
I mean, it's the classic one of cost, time, quality. The time is ever more precious, and with the cost of borrowing putting huge pressures on what developers can and can't do with what they're doing if they can speed up construction. There has been continued efforts at modern methods of construction, MMC, and off-site prefab construction, and often that is a key driver of where schemes have been brought forward. Of can we get the shell? Can we get it watertight? Can we look at these alternative methods of construction? There's a huge cost to entry on a lot of the sort of setup of prefab, and you only have to look at those who've tried and sadly fallen by the wayside over the last 20 years to see how challenging that is in practice. But that is definitely a consideration as part of the design process.
And just in terms of that kind of dynamic, do you see that kind of playing out in terms of like quality then, and how that that dynamic with quality and quality of design and how that plays out?
I think on a level basis, yes, I mean, there's always a possibility of it. I'm afraid that quality is often a easy driver to drive greater profits, and I think that comes again down to the ultimate reporting process of those schemes. If you look at those who have a longer term investment in a particular scheme, particular area, they're going to be around once it's complete, whether it's community engagement or it's being driven by a landowner who will take a longer term view. You will inevitably find it's much harder to make those quality cuts along the way. In terms of speed, I mean, you shouldn't need to cut on the quality of it if you prepare properly, but often it's a good excuse along the way.
And then just a further question, just picking up on something you mentioned earlier around kind of the design that brings people together. Have you got any comments on things like water fountains and benches and things like that within like a public space that encourage people to stay or be, in a space? And that, I just like that you mentioned bringing people together as kind of an aim.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely vital. I mean, it's limited point in my view. If you just build lots of houses to home people, you've got to create a sense of bringing them together in the space between. I think, fountains are lovely and good quality benches are fantastic.
Yeah, I mean,
but
water
I'm being slightly. I think actually it's the words that Robert mentioned. It's about the sense of overlooking. It's about creating public spaces where you feel safe to do things. One of the biggest successes we've actually found on schemes is where you can bring the play and the allotments together with overlooking onto it. So rather than allotments being that bit that you kind of need to put onto some scrubby bits of land elsewhere, it becomes a meaningful bit of central play. You bring the activity of people working in their allotments with kids playing around, and it sounds wonderful, but it does actually happen. If you then put houses around the outside of it, you then get a sense of security and it becomes part of the community in there. So that is a device that we found really successful of bringing good public space.
And I think that sounds wonderful. And is there a dynamic between the sense of being looked over, I think that's what you said, to create safety, versus the use of that space then creating noise that people find conflicting? I think that's quite a big question, but I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it harks back to a very early public consultation where a former MP made that point, saying there's no point putting the play area in the middle because children will make noise and no one will want to live around there. I don't know. I mean, I'll leave the Assembly to make the judgment on that particular point. In a city environment, I would like to think that it's better to create that noise and environment around there than to have sterile places.
I agree. Yeah, thank you.
I could add a couple of points to that discussion, because I was actually flicking through our publication of Streets and Squares looking for some of these examples, because I knew we'd done the studies. We do have a bench section. I couldn't find it, but on where people like spending time. What you find, not just on streets, but especially in public squares, is people do like to stay around the edges. There's kind of an inherent sense of safety to being along the edges rather than being in the middle of a larger space. And evolutionary biologists can probably tell you a lot more than me about why that is, but it does seem to be hardwired in us that we like to be along edges. And it's the same with bench placement. A lot of new developments make the mistake of putting benches facing traffic, and then your back is kind of facing the pavement, but it's not a location that people feel safe, because somebody could come up from behind you. So benches tend to be more often sat on when they face a wall and nobody can come from behind you, and that's true in the UK and in other countries as well. On the earlier point about construction costs, because I did have one point about that. There was a Knight Frank study done in 2020. It was actually for the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission, which had commissioned that report for their Living with Beauty report. They looked at a number of new developments in the UK. Unfortunately, none of them in London. But one of them that I jotted down was Poundbury, where despite having an 18% higher construction cost, because the buildings are higher quality, it now sells for a 55% value premium compared to similar properties in the Dorchester area. That was also true for higher quality developments like Accordia. It wasn't quite as an extreme example, but generally, if done well, higher quality developments do cost a bit more to build, but they also sell then for greater premiums. And if we could turn briefly to design codes, because Create Streets, we work a lot on design codes, the idea is that if you have the quality asks from the very beginning, and if everybody is on a level playing field, you take the additional quality expense out of the land value. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that the buildings will then sell for more after the fact, because every developer knows, oh, I'm going to have to spend 10% more on the construction cost, so I'll simply spend 10% less on the land. And as long as the design code is enforced consistently, then that should hold true. Unfortunately, I don't have any data to point to that yet, because design codes are still a relatively new feature of British planning.
Just on that point about the sales prices being higher for the design you mentioned in Poundbury, if that is the case, why doesn't that come forward more often? If developers could sell these properties for more, why don't they come forward with those designs?
Well, I think I'll let Robbie come in as well, because I think his firm has a lot of design code experience. But we do talk with a lot of developers. In fact, a lot of them are our clients. And a lot of it is just because this evidence is still quite new. If you think about this Knight Frank study from 2020, the planning arc in this country is so long that developments that that started being planned in 2020 are usually not even being built yet. So I think a lot of it is just kind of getting that information out there. When we speak with developers, most of them don't know about this study, but when we do tell people about them, and some of them are our clients, they do intend to build higher quality places because there is that understanding.
Thanks. I mean, yeah, it seems to be a no-brainer. I think there are a couple of points. One is often the simple financial reporting structures of those who are building it. Often the listed companies will have a certain driver of efficiency, and they need to just be cranking out the numbers, whether they are building them good, bad, or ugly, which perhaps is a cynical way of looking at it. But there are, I think what Robert said at the end of that evidence is a growing body of evidence. So, by producing that, we just finished a report with Bidwell's, which took a comparison between 4 sites, or 8 sites entirely, but 4 sites which were taking what we call landowner legacy long-term approach to developing the sites. 2 in Cornwall, 1 in Cirencester, 1 in Yorkshire, and comparing those to 4 similar-sized schemes being produced by the volume house builders, and just seeing how that trend of resale values were going up. And the resale values on 3 out of the 4 of those were anywhere between 9 and 22% higher for the legacy schemes. Now, I don't actually think that necessarily comes down to the build quality. It actually talks to a much more important point, which is sort of addressing Lord Bailey's point about the community ask, is actually they're investing in putting in the expensive bits of kit like community halls or subsidised rent for office space or retail space early doors, on the view that in the long run it will also contribute to that higher uplift on property values. And that again should therefore suggest we'll do that and you'll get higher returns. But for some people, that reporting structure, that financial reporting structure, just doesn't allow them to be able to take that longer term view, or they have trustees or reporting people who don't see that long-term potential and benefit. But we hope that the more research that gets done, the more we'll be able to share things like today, will help to enlighten the alternative ways of delivering better design.
Thank you very much. That's really helpful. Just on your first point there, so is the argument that basically a lot of volume house builders who might be publicly listed companies have to get to a certain profit margin, have to build a certain number of homes, they're good at building a certain type of home, they know how to do it, so they just keep it very simple?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Moema.
Thank you, and good afternoon to you all. So it has been really interesting to hear you all talk about, kind of your expertise in different areas of this really important topic. I guess my comment and my question is that there's lots that I agree with, but it all feels quite disparate. So, for example, I think obviously we need to think about the design and kind of making sure that people are involved in that process. I've worked on a number of regeneration consultations myself, but that is at odds with some of the statements around the process taking a long time. It takes a long time if we want to genuinely do that. Otherwise, we shorten the process and we don't do that. And I think if we're going to have something we can put forward and put in front of people, we need to be clear and honest about the opportunity cost. I guess another thing which I would really welcome the panel's views on is there are lots of different amenities or facilities being proposed in what makes a community. I remember very clearly we would have at one of my previous employers beautiful designs that would have won awards with the architects and the development director, and then they started to bring in the housing management team, and they're like, scrap that, scrap that, scrap that, because in 10 years' time, who's going to pay for that? And whose charges would those be kind of charged against? So Assembly Member Garbett's point about water features, for example.
It was drinking fountains, sorry. I meant drinking fountains, not water features.
Okay, but a thing with a long-term cost, quite high, I think for me, where design becomes bad is not when it's kind of completed and it's brand new, and everyone can frankly afford to maintain what's around them individually, but in 10, 15 years' time and it looks a bit rough around the edges because it's just too expensive. I just wonder how we can square that circle, because it doesn't feel like we are. We're talking about kind of a best case scenario, but we're also in different bits of the Assembly talking about the situation that leaseholders and shared owners find themselves in, precisely because they live in an award-winning building, which is beautiful, but nobody can afford to keep it going. Maybe I should start with Saffron.
I'm very happy to talk to the point about time, perhaps less so about management charges and costs, because that's not my area of expertise. I think you're right. There are significant disconnects in different parts of the system. I suppose from my perspective, given that most of my work is in the kind of long-term co-production of knowledge space, so how you bring not just citizens, but how you bring citizens and planning officers and policymakers together in ways that can develop different kinds of knowledge, which will then ideally lead into some of the kind of decisions that Robert and Robbie are talking about. That in itself is a long-term process, because it means changing some parts of the system, the way that things are done. So just to be very concrete about it, so I've been working very closely with Camden Council, for example, in the context of the Euston Station redevelopment. Complex, for many different reasons, following on from, the regeneration of King's Cross. Something's good, something's bad. But we've already been working together for kind of 5 years to come up with a different set of success measures and outcome measures from that regeneration process that are based in the lived experience of people who live in the neighbourhoods that are being most directly affected. Now, some of those are about kind of housing affordability. Some of those questions are about design, but a lot of them are about the design of spaces and services that will meet the needs of the current community. So they need to be designed in such a way that they are affordable in the long term. So we've already been working on that process for 5 years and trying to kind of bring in the other kind of major stakeholders in that place as well. So thinking about HS2, thinking about all of the kind of big institutions that are part of the Knowledge Quarter to say, what levers have you got, or what levers do we have collectively that can be pulled in different ways to try and get around the complexities that you were talking about and the financial kind of constraints and drivers, that you were talking about. So, the social value framework is something that we've been thinking about a lot. And I think, my view is that social value was, developed for a very specific purpose. It often does not work at all for communities in terms of, giving them a space to say what social value means in the context of the places where they're living. But it is a kind of exploited isn't quite the right word, but it's the one I'm going to use. It's an under kind of used lever when it comes to trying to potentially fill or bridge some of the gaps where we're, across the different experiences that we're talking about. And I think this is not necessarily a helpful answer because it's such a long-term one, but I do think there are so many bits of the system that need a kind of re-evaluation to kind of step back and think about how we can use those levers more effectively. That then speak to your question about, time and trade-offs.
Okay, thank you. If I can go next to Lucy, and then we'll come back that way.
First point on timing. I think it's worth thinking about where time is invested. And there's certainly evidence to show that involving the community early on and over a number of different sort of sessions, be that months or maybe even years, that actually, whilst it might not sort of significantly speed up the process, it does help to remove obstacles and barriers along the way, even before kind of formal planning applications are submitted, and can smooth that process overall. So I think that there are benefits in terms of time and de-risking the process that involving the community can have. It's not all about just additional time and resource going into it. And I think then there are additional benefits as well, sort of after the development has been brought forward and people are moving into a new development. They're not just moving in to a place, and with people that they have never met before, that they're moving into kind of a community that they've been part of the process of creating. And I think that actually activating people in that way and setting the foundations for them to play a more active role in that community is something that has value and saves money, if we want to be crude about it, in the longer term as well. And that leads on, I think, to your sort of second point about the challenges of long-term stewardship. And we know that there are lots of challenges with private management, place management companies being brought in after a house builder has moved on. That often, the charges are very high, that services might not be well delivered, that the accountability structures of those organisations, businesses are often quite opaque.
Can I just interrupt you there?
Of course.
So I guess, Mike, the point I'm making is I don't disagree with anything that any of you said, but the really important point missing from the conversation for me is that it's not really obsolescence, but that's built into the design. So somebody produces something which looks wonderful and nobody has the expertise to manage it, so they outsource that to a third party. If you didn't include all that stuff, which makes it look nice and so on, you do end up with a concrete box, but a concrete box will keep going. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, yeah. Okay, so yes, I understand your point, and I suppose I was just sort of trying to summarise the problems with that model that you've talked about. So there are alternative long-term stewardship models and different ways of financing long-term stewardship of places that are community-led, community land trusts, for example. There's the Community Land Trust Network that I would suggest that you reach out to because they will have a lot more evidence and case studies to tell you about in terms of how that exactly works. But the fundamental principles of that type of approach, and there are other models as well, is that the financial incentives are different, and that the community is more involved because they have more of a stake in maintaining and improving their local neighbourhood. So there are alternative models out there that don't just rely on a place management company or even the local authority to keep up those public spaces, and they are proven to be effective at doing that.
Okay, thank you. Robert?
I think Lucy's covered a lot of those points of the alternative methods of control, the land owner trust. There are elements of what you said about the built-into obsolescence, and I think it's always very tempting to say, well, we need to put in X, Y, or Z. Starting from, I think, an earlier point about that sort of delay in the process, again, I think if you do get a meaningful consultation, I know there's possibly a conversation might move on that way in due course, but the most successful way we've done that has been with charrettes, where you're getting people, and out of the charrette process, not only do you start to engage in smaller groups, giving people the pencil to start to make marks on the paper, but you also work out who are the voices within that community that you can draw upon. And then again, it's trying to look at objectively what is actually sort of kind of needed, because again, often out of that process comes some louder voices saying we need with the shortage of X, Y, or it might be doctors, or it might be whatever the city might be. But actually, I think again, it's trying to objectively find what is going to benefit those on the development that's been there, but also just looking beyond the red line. It's so tempting, I think, with development just to continue to say, this is our little area here. That has got to look beyond the red line of an application to how it's going to knit back into the surrounding area, and therefore, how is that microeconomy going to then inform the model for those who are living under the burden of that new development?
Well, yeah, I think it's an excellent question, and it is something that we hear from planning officials when we work not just in London but around the country, because there is obviously the design ask at the beginning of the process, and then things do get diluted along the way. I wish I could speak a bit more about leasehold issues. I'm not an expert on that, though I appreciate the difficulties. One of our colleagues that creates streets is about to sell one of his flats at a loss because of issues with that. So I'll kind of go slightly higher level, and I think we do need to appreciate just our priorities within the planning system. Recently, we took a group of officials and MPs to France, and we spoke with developers there about just how things are done in France. And there, the planning system is very strict about what you can or can't do. So when a developer starts a project, they won't waste time designing things that then later will be thrown out, because it's very clear about what you can or can't do. And that's always been kind of the principle of design codes in the UK as well. Hopefully they don't get watered down too much, but the idea of design codes is that you do have a very clear ask at the beginning, and hopefully that eliminates this the kind of constant back and forth negotiation that you often see in the UK between developers and planning officials, and this kind of uncertainty about what you can or can't do. And if you could save costs in that process, because time is money, and developers who sit on land for years and years and years waiting for planning permission, that's when things like water fountains and drinking fountains get thrown out, because they've just suddenly become impossible. And you see it in London more widely now. I'm sure we're all aware of the crisis in London. There's basically no starts in 2025, so we're very far from meeting the 80,000 target that the government has set. And that's because it's becoming extremely difficult to develop new buildings in London. And of course, nice-to-haves are going to fall by the wayside when basically it's becoming unviable to build anything, unfortunately.
Assemblymember Baker.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a question about design codes and design review panels. I'd like to ask Saffron and Rob at this end, but if you have anything else to contribute, please do come in. So is the use of design codes and design review panels helping to address the design deficit between the high-quality design standard Londoners would like to see built and what is actually being delivered?
I'm going to defer this question because my work isn't really about design codes or design review panels. I'm happy to talk more generally about
the design deficit. Yeah. So is it okay if we go to Robert and then come back to you about the design deficit and anything else that might be, as long as I don't step on anyone else's toes. Sorry. Please. Yes. This end, Robert. Yeah.
Well, we have mixed views about design review panels, because they are made up by individuals, of course, and the kind of different priorities of these individuals vary as they vary for all of us, and you get what we would consider to be effective design review panel members and less effective ones. I'll make a wider point about what's called the design disconnect. So I don't have the numbers to hand, but there have been studies done about just the difference in views that you see between members of the general public and design professionals. People who tend to be professional architects or planners, they tend to have very different views from the general public, often 180 degrees, like quite literally the public's favorite building will be the professional's least favorite building. And we think that's a problem, because we think that design professionals should serve the public. We think that buildings should reflect what communities want to see, not necessarily what the professionals would like to see, and what might be the front cover of a glossy architectural magazine. We think that's less important than the sort of buildings that members of the community would like to see. So, I mean, it varies. There are some really, really excellent design review panel members. Some of my colleagues sit on design review panels. Some of our friends sit on design review panels, and of course they're excellent. I'm sure they give very good advice, but I don't think they necessarily guarantee that the results will reflect what local communities would like to see.
Okay, thanks. Shall I go to other Robert and then come back to you, Saffron? Is that okay? Yes.
Can I just pick up on the design code point of it as well? We do, like Robert, write a lot of design codes, and it's a particular personal point for me at the moment of getting what is a good design code, because I think it's got to reflect the values of ultimately what wants to be delivered. Is it raising the bar of design? Well, there have been efforts of trying to do that with Building for Healthy Life and other parts of it. Now, I work with Building for Healthy Life a lot. It is, I'm afraid, a very subjective document. It can be voted, it can be scored on by most people around here, and we would find a different way of scoring it. I think you've ultimately got to look at creating something which is objective, to a point that Robert made earlier. It gives that greater certainty to what you're doing. We've developed a set of code cards that ultimately, in visual, in a visual way, demonstrate the principles of what you're meant to be doing to set up. A lot of these points are common sense to any competent designer, but it's, I think, a problem of the industry that a lot of what's been done is rushed out, is dealt with by those who perhaps are not as well versed in what comes together, and there's not that same review process of checking that might have happened in generations gone by. And that actually is where I think sometimes when design review panels do work, it is actually hugely helpful. I would not disagree for 1 second with what you just said about the calibre and makeup of design review panels, but actually, having been on a number of design review panels myself, where they work really well is where you can have that active debate with the design team to be a friendly critic of the scheme and ask them to focus on areas which should just lift the scheme up. I don't think it should be, the design review panel should not be there to solve the problems and redesign, as much as those on the panel want to think that that is their job. It's there to try and help guide and shape that, and to provide an alternative view to those on the planning side of things who may not have that same design expertise along the way. So I think if you are going to use design codes, yes, they can they can be used to raise to help with the design deficit, because they can provide a set of controls that, if written objectively and short in as condensed a manner as possible, then they can be very, very powerful. Again, my rule would be to hold up that distance and say, what am I controlling with the picture? You don't need to read the words on there. And I think that again, is where it can, when you start to get to that level, it can start to help with the design deficit.
Thanks. Thank you. Saffron.
Yeah, so I think my comment is really about not about design codes or design review panels per se, but the mechanisms that we have for understanding, what communities and residents want and need in the first place. So, and I think this speaks to earlier points about both time and process, and whether we're talking about engagement or consultation or something else entirely. So I think. For me, what the deficit lies in the opportunity for residents and communities to have a role in designing research questions or the research processes, as much as then being part of a participatory process, whether that's co-produced research or a design mechanism. So being able to kind of work alongside planners and designers to say, let's think about the evidence that's being used to inform, how we understand what communities want and need, and bring that kind of process of questioning the sources of evidence that are used, questioning the kind of research mechanisms that are available, that then kind of lead into design briefs and codes and opportunities later on.
Thank you. And there was research done by Bartlett School. I appreciate it wasn't your research, which was about the design deficit. And one of the things that was identified was effectively lack of skills. And I don't think that's the lack of people who have those skills, but not enough people, rather than those people being de-skilled. Do you think if we had more of that capacity in local authorities, then there'll be more opportunity to engage productively with local communities? Because it seems to me, if you're saying that the architects, want to design things that are design-led, and then you've got this, then there seems to be a whole area in between for good design that isn't necessarily like at the cutting edge, but that people just like. But that seems to be what we're missing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's not just a lack of capacity within local authorities, although that is absolutely the case, that there's a significant lack of people, resources, as well as the kind of skills that those people have, but in all bits of the system. So, there is some really great work being done by some architects, for example, on really sensitive and, empathic design processes that are very ethical and take a very long time, but there are significant bits of the system, whether that's in local authorities or in professional practice and in the education process, essentially. So I think, a lot more capacity is required in the system to be able to mainstream this and shift it from being a project kind of approach where some people are doing really excellent work, but, most people aren't, not because they can't, but because that's just not, the way that their particular corporation works. Or I think, that would help significantly.
Thanks very much.
Maybe if I could just quickly add to that.
I think I might have to pass back. I think we're going to cover similar issues, so you might have a chance to chip in. Apologies, we're running out of time.
Assemblymember Boff.
I'll give you a chance to talk, Mr. Quayler. Is it regrettable that the present government has removed the requirement for beauty in building design from the latest National Planning Policy Framework?
Well, they haven't actually. They've removed some mentions of it, but I believe in the latest NPPF it's still mentioned 6 or 7 times. So it is still in there, and there is still a quite strong policy about doing design guides and design codes. So we're quite happy that actually it is still in there. It's not as strong, admittedly, but it is still in there in some capacity.
So what are the other sort of legislative regulatory barriers to constructing buildings that align with the community's preferences? Is there anything regulatory in the way of providing the homes that people want to see, or providing the building? Mr. Kerr.
It's a good question. And I think you could look at the challenge of managing across the board with any regulation. It's the national picture rather than just the London picture. But I think there are great moves that have been done by a number of the London boroughs to legislate within their own local policies. And Westminster have got a fantastic policy on environmental requirements, which is a degree of pragmatism. So there are some really some really important bits of local government, on a council basis. It's coming forward within London, which can help inform things more broadly across the country.
But I was involved. We're all familiar with the Liverpool Street Station development, and I had a few chats with those developers a few years ago on the previous plan, and they'd actually been to the local authority with what might have made Create Streets quite happy. I know they weren't very happy with the design they came out with, but they went forward initially with a design that they were quite happy with. But the local authority themselves said it's too pastiche. We want something bold and brassy and all the rest of it. So it appears as though occasionally the regulatory regime, whether or not it be local planning standards or national standards, get in the way of providing those kind of properties.
Perhaps it's not a question of the word beauty, but I think that it's a great shame that the clause within the NPPF that made it abundantly clear that style should not be a matter of planning policy was removed. And that was a very clear point that removed that subjectivity of officers on there. I think style is, as I've already mentioned, is a frustratingly pointless tool that is used to frustrate good design. So, if you're wanting to suggest bringing back legislation, let's make sure that we say that style should not be a matter of planning determination.
Mm-hmm. I've always thought the NPP had no style, and now you've convinced me.
Yeah.
Mr. Corbyn.
It varies, of course, because every government comes and has their own wording. But to take that Liverpool Street Station as an example, it could have been that had it gone to a different officer, they might have said something completely different. And it takes us back to that whole point earlier about planning certainty. A developer could spend years and years working up a scheme, and then suddenly it goes to the wrong person at the local authority, or right or wrong, but they'd have different opinions, and then years of work, millions of pounds of design could go out the window. And we've spoken of developers who find themselves in that position. So it goes back to my earlier point about the way things are done in France, where it is very regulatory. It's very clear about what you can or can't do, and as long as you follow those regulations, then there's nobody in the local authority who can tell you you can't do this. You can do this just on the basis of essentially of their interpretation of whatever the planning guidance might be. And then to the earlier point, of course, we need better skilled planning officers who are able to then gauge whether or not it is meeting the code or meeting the regulations. The biggest concern we hear from planning officers when we work on design codes is, this is all great, but is my 21-year-old graduate junior planning officer going to be able to interpret this design code? So over the years, we've actually kind of, made them clearer and simpler with that in mind. But I think that's a good exercise for any planning authority. Can this be judged by anybody? Because it's not just the experienced professionals who are going to be gauging planning guidance.
Do you think the developers would benefit if the planning system had more certainty in it?
We think they would. Whether or not it would necessarily lead to better quality buildings is debatable. I mean, one of the benefits of the British planning system is that you can kind of do non-standard things. The French system gives you certainty, but it's a bit more rigid. It's more difficult to do something non-standard. But I think it would certainly streamline the planning process and make developing less expensive if there was more certainty.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Moema.
Thank you. This question is for Saffron. So you touched on some of this in your response to Assembly Member Baker, but what do you think we could learn from the citizen science approach to enable better connections between what Londoners want and what's being delivered in relation to design?
Yeah, thank you. So the citizen science approach is fundamentally different to consultation and engagement. It's about equipping residents with the research capacities and skills and opportunities to, as I mentioned, frame their own research questions, work with a whole variety of different stakeholders, whether that's academics, planners, private sector developers, to generate research which can then be used to inform regeneration planning decisions, whether that's about a specific design question or it's about social infrastructure or about the outcomes of a particular regeneration process. And it covers within that, pretty much all of the issues that we've talked about today, whether you're talking about belonging and place attachment or you're talking about livelihood opportunities and kind of employment outcomes. So I think it's a different way of working. And it's relatively new, but it's something that UCL has been testing with regeneration stakeholders, including the GLA and local authorities and private sector developers in different parts of London and around the UK. And I think the key thing that we've been trying to do is, as I mentioned earlier, move away from a project approach, because the world is full of great research and it's full of brilliant, participatory projects. But the challenge here is about how you mainstream these ways of working, and they can become, part of the everyday for a planning authority or for, professional practitioners. So there's a research question here, which is about what are the mechanisms for co-producing the evidence, but then there's also a system question, which is how do you get that evidence in front of the right decision makers, and that really comes down to partnership working, and then there's how do you make this a financially sustainable way of working, because that's been one of the obstacles to community-led research becoming mainstream in the past. So one of the innovations that we have been testing is using the community infrastructure levy as a mechanism to fund long-term citizen science research. So I don't know how much time there is to go into it now, but there's a case study that looks at work that we've done with Camden Council to test the feasibility of this approach. So using a top slice mechanism from SIL, essentially, to taking the precedent of community art. So we are working now with Camden to take a 1% top slice from SIL and to put that into funding citizen science projects in the borough. So we've tested that over kind of a couple of years, looked at the feasibility, and this is the first year that it's been adopted. So this year, 2 cohorts of citizen scientists will be trained using that mechanism, and that cost goes into employing them and upskilling them, and then they receive a UCL citizen science certificate. So it's reassuring the partners that they're working with that their research skills are appropriate and rigorous, but then that evidence being put into the context of specific planning decisions that are being made by Camden in the context of regeneration. So the first cohort is going to be looking at training a group of young women to work on issues around safety and public design.
That's really interesting. And just really quickly, so do you think it's too early to think about what any potential outcomes? And also, how do you guard against striking a balance between those people that get involved in this, that it doesn't get hijacked? I don't know what other way to put it.
That's a really important question, and I think the reason that we've set up the academy is to create some infrastructure to manage all of those issues. So the Citizen Science Academy is held at UCL, so we take responsibility for the training and the rigour of the research. The academy has been set up specifically to bring people into the knowledge co-production process who wouldn't normally participate in consultation. And I really dislike the phrase usual suspects, but I'm going to use it here for efficacy because we all know what we're talking about. So it removes the obstacles to participation by designing them out, essentially, by employing people, training people, working with voluntary sector organisations to find people who wouldn't normally participate. But as I mentioned earlier, this is part of a bigger kind of partnership mechanism. So that question of whether research agendas are co-opted or hijacked is mitigated and managed by having a variety of different stakeholders, working together.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will remember co-opted instead of hijacked for future. It's much more polite. So my final question to all of you, I'm going to start with Lucy and then work backwards, if that's okay. In your opinion, do you think new towns embed principles of mid-rise or gentle density? Thinking about, some of you have mentioned kind of experiences from other parts of Europe, but if there are other examples of what works and what doesn't, maybe in addition to what's been said, rather than repeating, but also just all of that in the context of what you would advise the GLA or the mayor when it comes to the design of those new towns. So what's really central to making them successful?
I would pick up on some of the ideas and themes I've been talking about throughout the session today, which is to think primarily about citizenship and the role that not just communities but people as citizens can have in placemaking and in the places that they live. When it comes to new towns are a really interesting example because I think that they can actually be a test bed for a lot of new ways of doing things for and specifically civic and democratic renewal. And I think that certainly in the design phase that citizens should be part of that process. I've just published a paper last week which looks at the citizenship opportunity in new towns, and in that paper I propose a model of development corporations, so sort of development corporations plus, which is based on that core model, but creating a partnership-based model, bringing in local institutions, local authorities, but crucially members of local communities and citizens into that process from the very start. I think that's absolutely fundamental to the success of the Newtown programme.
Thank you. It'd be really great if you could share that with the rest of the committee, that paper.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. Robert?
I think advice, we must not forget the generation who will be living in these new towns. It's very easy to focus our design decisions based on what is now, but as has been said, these things take such a long time to come forward. And we commissioned back in 2016 a report called Tomorrow's Home, which looked at the changing chains of the millennial generation coming through. And I think it's probably up time to look at the next generation coming through because they will be pertinent there. And there were so many lessons from that report, whether it was the way that we live in our homes, the use of car ownership, what then got sped up with COVID, the working trends of being able to work further away from home and travel less often. So that's one element of it. I think that the model in which these new towns are being brought forward, that ability to create a stewardship or interesting development corporation framework that can allow the control of what is being brought forward to be taken over the lifetime of the project, and actually for those financial benefits of doing it properly to be seen the whole way through, because it has a benefit then to all of those stakeholders coming in and through the length of the project. And then I think the other bit is to then look at what are the bits we've spoken about community and about getting the affordable housing right. That's not just then move that and put it as a side piece, but understanding how you shape the community with these other pieces that make up for a complete neighbourhood. Because ultimately, if we want to create sustainable neighbourhoods, it's not about getting into your Volkswagen, because we all know how good their emissions have been over the years. It's about being able to create walkable neighbourhoods. And within doing that, again, I think we have a sister company called Place Logic, which uses open source GIS mapping to analyse the facilities that are in the surrounding area and to help inform actually how walkable these facilities will be to create a complete neighbourhood. And on top of that, we just finished a KTP with the University of Strathclyde to look at the urban morphometrics. So, you know, it's all good and well saying it's close to walk between the spaces, but if you've got to walk up a steep hill or a ridiculously wide, broad street, which has got the wind howling down, you're less likely to do that. So I think it's using the tools which are being brought forward, and the Digital Task Force have got a number of tools that are within there on the government's website, which are really exciting tools to look at how we can bring the empirical evidence to the design process. It's very easy as a designer to say, this is a great idea and we should put the local centre right in the middle. But if you're building a new town and there's a existing settlement to the side, just perhaps moving that centre away from the middle of your red line to the edge can actually have a wider benefit to those that you're building this new town adjacent to. So I think, you know, there's a number of layers there, but hopefully that gives some food for thought.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Robert.
Big question. At Create Streets, we have this saying, town building, not house building. I think we tend to, in this country, just kind of give big developments to the volume house builders, and just because they've proven that they can build at scale, assume that they can also design genuine mixed-use communities. And I think the overarching lesson from the past 20, 30 years is that while they may be very good at building lots of homes at scale, relatively affordably, they're not necessarily the best at designing places. So I think it's really important that we kind of step back, and before we unleash tens of thousands of new homes being constructed, that there is a proper master plan in place, and that it's focused around infrastructure. And the kind of infrastructure, particularly transport infrastructure, is really important. We're big fans of trams that create streets, because we've seen what kind of development they enable outside of the UK. To give a couple of examples, in Lund, Sweden, they've built one tram line, and along that tram line, there are 13,000 new homes being constructed, most of them without any parking. In Angers, in France, there's 6,000 new homes being constructed along one tram line. If you try to do the same thing around just cars or even just buses, you won't get the same kind of density or high quality of place, because a lot of studies have shown, there's a good German and Swiss study that shows that people are 75% more likely to switch from a car to a tram than a car to a bus. There are various reasons why people prefer trams over buses, which I won't go into, but it is, it's a fact of life that the sort of infrastructure dictates the sort of place that it will be. And then finally, kind of wrapping up all the points that we've been making, we do think there should be a strong element of co-design and design codes to give confidence, not just to future residents about the sort of places that this will be, but also to the developers involved. we were working on one project in Litchfield where we did the engagement, and then we'd work on the design code. And the winning developer who bid on the project, he actually wanted certainty from the council that the design code will be enforced, because if he's going to be investing extra money on a better place, that the other developers will also have to play by the same rules, because that will boost the premium for his development if the whole thing is better and nicer. So that wouldn't have been the case without strong input from the community, who were very clear about the kind of place they wanted to see built.
Thank you. And finally, Saffron.
Yeah, thank you. So I agree with the comments that have been made by colleagues about the importance of co-design and co-production and bringing communities in to ensure they have a voice. So I won't restate those. I think what's interesting about planned new towns and communities is that they can, as Lucy said, be a test bed. And I would really urge, members of this committee and the GLA more broadly to take an evidence-based approach to thinking about future design. So we've talked quite a lot this afternoon about bits of the system that don't work, that are kind of widely acknowledged to cause tensions and difficulties. So if we're talking about, long-term new town planning where there's a 25-year, 30-year kind of delivery timescale, let's think about the bits of the model, the bits of the system that are not really working, and identify alternative ways of doing things that could be tested from the beginning, whether that's, different forms of ownership or alternative models, or thinking about longer term about, the kind of landowner, land stewardship models. And then also thinking about where there are kind of double dividends, essentially. So one of the main issues I encounter a lot in my work is about livelihood insecurity linked to the very high costs of housing. And kind of energy that go along with that.
Sorry, what do you mean by livelihood insecurity? I think I get it, but...
So livelihood security being really important, but insecurity being a kind of obstacle to people's prosperity and flourishing. But that insecurity not just being about having a job or not having a job, but the intersection between work and affordable housing and affordable services in the neighbourhood. So if we've got a kind of a new generation of new towns and communities coming on board, let's think in quite innovative or radical ways about how you might be able to design out energy costs when you're working with architects or delivering new housing at scale with housing associations, instead of then creating places which are too expensive for people to live in that then require additional kind of payments to keep them there. So I would urge you to kind of think in a radical way about alternative models.
Thank you, everyone. We have now reached the end of the first panel discussion. I would like to thank our first panel of guests for attending this afternoon and for their contributions. We'll now take a short adjournment for 5 minutes while we change panels. Welcome back to the London Assembly's Planning and Regeneration Committee. We now continue our discussion on a better design for London, and I would like to welcome our second panel of guests. In the chamber, we have Sarah Considine, Head of Design Unit at the Greater London Authority, Karen Montgomery, Team Leader, Strategic Planning, Greater London Authority, Marissa Ryan Hernandez, London Plan Manager, Strategic Planning, the Greater London Authority, Holly Lewis, co-founding partner, We Made That and the Mayor's Design Advocate, and Dina Roke, Chair of London Housing Panel. Thank you all for joining us. The first question will be asked by myself, and it is addressed to all of you, and is the National Planning Policy Framework says the creation of high-quality, beautiful and sustainable buildings and places is fundamental to what the planning and development process should achieve. Is this what is happening in London? We'll start at this side of the table and then move across. Thank you.
High quality and beautiful.
Beautiful and sustainable buildings.
And sustainable. What a strange word salad. I think from the feedback from the London Housing Panel members, they're probably more concerned about are these homes that people can live in and afford to live in. So in terms of what the NPPF is trying to do, what can I say to that? I will pass on to other colleagues, but I think the principle of designing buildings or designing places that work for people to live in probably contribute to their beauty. And are we doing that? Not always. And it depends a lot on what's coming forward from landowners rather than it being driven by communities themselves and by local authorities themselves in terms of creating plans for what they want and then delivering them.
I think that seems fair and reflects my experience as well, working with communities to plan for the future of their areas. High quality, beautiful and sustainable might not be on the top of the list that you hear from Londoners when you're speaking to them about what they want from that development, notwithstanding that it's in the NPPF. I think there are some really great examples where that has definitely been achieved. There are some fantastic schemes. I'm thinking of the recent Sterling Prize winner, which is almshouses in Southwark. Beautiful, high quality, sustainable for sure. I would say those schemes are an exception rather than a rule. I think that London does a brilliant job of delivering some fantastic schemes and maybe could do better in raising the bar for the general provision of what's delivered. And I think that that's right because it's largely market-led, as Dinah's already pointed out, that the general bar doesn't reach the highs of some of the highs that London can deliver. And that would be my experience. There are also examples of things that have been shortlisted for, and one's amazing prizes delivered by Hackney Council, for example, on small sites that they own, where there's a higher level of control from a client who has a concern beyond just profit. I think you see some really, really high-quality schemes. I think you do see some high-quality, profit-driven schemes, but they have problematic sort of trade-offs sometimes, and that's what Londoners see.
Thanks. Yes, definitely agree with what other panel members have already mentioned. From a spatial planning perspective, very key to what planning and planning policy does is, again, the spatial element, so for people in place. And I think that's certainly something that we have seen as part of the London Plan and as part of any policy development. So very much linking in how design and environment and all related matters are addressing those points for a diverse London and what their needs are. So that can be different in different parts of the city and for different people. So I do think we're definitely seeing that as part of how we're developing policy.
Thank you. I think just to add to that as well, in terms of kind of my remit looking not just at London plan issues, but at local plans as well, I certainly think the current London plan and what local boroughs are doing around design does set the bar quite high in a lot of places, particularly when considered in the national context and looking at the MPPF and what it's looking at in terms of design. There are certain aspects of the current London plan that go beyond the MPPF that reflect certain challenges that this design needs to respond to in London's kind of complex, dense context. So things like private outdoor space with all residential units. So I think there are certain aspects in London where, yes, we do things very well, but as others said, it's perhaps not as high as it could be across the board.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of what my fellow panellists have said, but maybe just bring in the idea that I don't think there is a sort of one-size-fits-all approach to what good looks like and what quality means, and it has to be a kind of place-driven approach. And I think the way that our work addresses that is to really focus on design as sort of process as opposed to product, and making sure that we have all the right stuff in place to get the right outcomes for a particular site, community, space. So, you know, yes, I think there's really good progress there, and the work that we're doing to kind of embed quality into systems and processes is very good, and there's been a lot of kind of progress. But of course, in a kind of environment where there's a hell of a lot of urgency to deliver, and economic pressures, that there are obviously instances where London's built environment falls short.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Lord Bailey.
To what extent does longevity play a part in beauty? Because I've lived on 4 or 5 different estates, and I bet when they were built they looked good, but later on they looked horrific. And some of that is about how they were laid out, some of that were about the materials used, preference that people made, some about brutalism. You know, to what extent, when you're doing your policies and all your work, does longevity become part of what is beautiful? Because it might be beautiful in the beginning, but the long lifetime, hundreds of thousands of people going through them, they get worn down. Maybe if I start with Holly, and also Holly, to challenge this idea that sometimes just because something is built for profit, it can't be done properly. Because of course, if a council builds something a little bit more expensively than maybe a developer would have, that's a trade-off for the council, because that means that's money they've had to take from somewhere else. It doesn't appear out of the ether.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's interesting to me that when I think of the schemes that have been delivered to that high quality, beautiful, sustainable, the things like the almshouses come to mind. And if I'm trying to think of a developer-led example, say I think of Elephant Park in Southwark, which is very near to me. High quality delivery, but we know from the work that we've done, for example, on the Southwark Land Commission, that this is a very controversial scheme also. So there is this kind of trade-off in a way, sometimes between Londoners' sentiments towards development, which I think that you could look at that scheme and say that it's very high quality. I think it is very high quality, but it doesn't have the... I don't know, there's a sort of warm sentiment towards the almshouses that is somehow not quite there in those schemes where you know that they've been driven by another motive. And maybe that's an unfair comparison, but it's interesting to me that when I'm thinking of what would be the schemes that I point to that have done brilliant things, it's one where the client is somehow motivated by the bigger, longer-term public good of the scheme, has been interesting to me. In terms of longevity, I think that is often, and I would hope to say always, very carefully considered. I think that there is something quite challenging. So I live, for example, on a 1970s built council estate in Lambeth, where, to me, the architecture is beautiful. It's been, in some instances, recommended as a non-designated heritage asset because it's of a certain type of architecture. There has been recent investment in upgrading that and upkeeping that and trying to improve the environmental performance of that estate. And it's perhaps the resource isn't adequate to meet the ambition of what you'd want for that estate. And I think it's quite difficult to design knowing what the future conditions around revenue funding and maintenance are going to be. And nothing requires no maintenance. Everything requires some looking after. I think that there is a kind of new architectural vernacular in London, which is largely brick of a certain scale that minimises maintenance in a lot of ways, that is probably quite positive. That I think that new London vernacular type of architecture likely will last pretty well. But then we can also see examples of there's a Peter Barber scheme, a Peter Barber architect scheme in Bow, for example, where there's a controversy recently that is a scheme that is not yet listed but could potentially be listed in future. It's a very high architectural quality, and the Clarion Housing Group, who are responsible for that, are replacing the windows with UPVC windows because there's problems with the existing windows. This trade-off of long-term maintenance versus architectural ambition is one that you can point to examples and see where that's happening, I think, in London. And it's quite challenging, I think, to make policy that says think about the long term, because this is so kind of open-ended. I think that in general, between the building regulations and planning policy, people are thinking long term, but the ability to understand what the future conditions around maintenance and revenue funding is going to be is really difficult. And maybe in the 70s, the current conditions around local authority kind of maintenance funding, for example, they might not have predicted that we'd be where we are now.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, I think one of the things I took from this morning's session is that design, the physical look of a thing, is linked to the social use of the thing as well. It isn't just one or the other. Your comment about almshouses, I think, illustrates it quite well. You know, how people perceive it will be used and who will be in it and will they be in it and blah, 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 affects their ability to, in how they look at the design. I think that's important.
Thank you. Assembly Member Boff.
I'm interested about this whole trade-off of quality and beauty, especially, let's take, for example, Elephant Park, which is a high-quality, impersonal, unaffordable development of tower blocks. Unaffordable for the people who live there, impersonal. It's just a big thing. And yet it's really, really high quality. And I wonder if those quality arguments work on the residents, really, when that's said to them. Wouldn't they rather go for something that was a bit beautiful, Ms. Lewis or Ms. Wright?
I'm happy to go again, but I'd be also really interested to hear from Dinah on this. Yes. I think that was, in my very first response, yes. What I was kind of hinting at is actually, if you list high quality, beautiful, sustainable, I think for a lot of the Londoners that we've spoken to about the development of London, affordable would be higher on that list. And I think it's really...
But this is why I don't want to speak too much on cross purposes, because, you know, we're really talking about just design. The affordable element is not, and perhaps I'm wrong, and perhaps challenge me, is not a design element. It's about how you use good design and who that good design is available to. But it's
I think you've hit on exactly the right point, actually, which is that if you speak to non-professionals, it's impossible to kind of extricate preferences around development from design preferences around development. You don't see these two things. It's just, well, this is how I experience it. My view on this development is that it is unaffordable and I feel excluded from it. For example, it would be impossible to get beyond that conversation to, but what about the design? Like, what do you think about the brick choices? Or what do you think about the public realm? If that person feels already a negative sentiment towards the development because it is exclusionary to them or because they feel that it's unaffordable, then you almost can't progress to a design conversation. And I don't think that we can pull those things apart. Is that the experience of many Londoners of the development context of London is that they feel a negative sentiment towards it, but not because of the design, because of many other things. And like you say, affordability is not necessarily fundamentally a design question, but we have to think about it as a holistic picture. And those things, I think it's very, very difficult to separate them. Sorry.
Ms. Rowe, did you want to come in?
Yes, because I would say that actually design is about making things that work for everybody.
Yes.
And that they'll need to work in different ways for the people who are inside the building, from the way in which they work from people who are walking past it or going past it on the top of a bus or whatever. So the experience of the maintenance of it and whether it's easy to maintain is intrinsic to how the choices that were made in the first place about how it's going to be designed. And I think perhaps, I mean, one of the things that I will send to you afterwards is the community conversation that the London Housing Panel has had recently with a number of people living in social rented housing. And one key point that came out from that is, if you're designing things that the capital cost is lower, so that you can afford to build it, but that then means that the people who are going to be living in those homes later on can't afford to maintain it, whether it's a two-storey dwelling or whether it's a multi-storey block of flats. Is that good design? If it's longevity, if it's not designed, so you ask, and planning policy asks for dwellings to be, and building regulations ask for dwellings to be able to last for about 60 years. Now, generally, we're hoping that homes last for longer than that. In other countries in Europe, they don't. They're not so worried about the homes lasting for very long. They're happy to demolish and build again. Now, from a sustainability point of view, you might think that was a bit daft. But actually, from a does it work, it's got to work for the people who are going to live in those homes. And if they can't afford to lead a life, and I was listening to Saffron Woodcraft earlier, if they can't afford to lead a life living in those homes because the cost of energy, because the buildings leak badly or they haven't got very good energy performance, that's design. Or if the maintenance of those buildings hasn't been thought through, and that they can't afford to pay for the maintenance of the buildings.
You referenced earlier to the choices made at the start, made in the first place. Do you think that if people were involved at an earlier time, that because public polling has consistently shown that there's a strong preference for traditional type architecture and human scaled streets, do you think people would be more open to these new the designs if they were part of those early choices, making those early choices?
Completely. I mean, the panel's whole, approach is involve people earlier, involve us earlier, involve people earlier, keep us involved, and tell us why you're making the decisions that you're making over the longer term. But one of the interesting things that came out from having the community conversation with quite a decent chunk of people who are living in taller buildings was that particular group really like the homes that they're living in, and it's not about the height. They like those homes because they're incredibly energy efficient. At the moment, the lifts are all working, so they're quite happy living in them. But it's the I can refer you to some work that Saffron did for a community group I was involved in Brixton Green, Lambeth again, where we carried out a whole series of deliberative workshops. So again, as a methodology, the community conversation is quite useful to getting information after the event. The deliberative workshops are a very helpful approach to actually doing that educating process, perhaps the wrong word, where actually people have the same information, the community has the same information as the professionals, and can participate very, very successfully in helping making those decisions.
Perhaps I could ask some from the GLA. I mean, as I say, this public polling is quite convincing that traditional designs are favoured. They're not really being delivered under the current London plan, are they? I mean, you can always quote an exception, and I accept that there are exceptions. There's that lovely development, Packington, development in Islington, for example. Super development, modern. But generally speaking, it's not happening, is it?
I mean, my reflection on that would be that Londoners value architecture that is contextual to place, and they value the historic fabric and the historic architecture of London. So it's incredibly important that development that comes forward is kind of contextual to place and to historic fabric, but also to community heritage. So that's not the listed buildings, that's the stuff that matters in places to people. So I think, you know, coming back to your point, you're absolutely right that engagement with communities is really, really key to architecture coming forward that meets the needs of particular communities, and being really ambitious in terms of engagement processes.
May I say, I heard from the Mayor the other day about consulting communities, engaging communities, but he doesn't seem to use co-design very much. The community there at the earliest possible stage, at the first thought that a site might be developed, that doesn't seem to be part of it.
I think it depends on what context you're looking at. I mean, if you were to look at some of the regeneration funding programmes that my place unit colleagues deliver, then community engagement and really ambitious levels of co-design and even co-clienting is absolutely mainstreamed through those funding programmes. But that is, of course, where we have kind of greater level of control, where we're putting funding into these regen funding programmes. So I think it really depends on what area of development you're sort of looking at.
I think most of the areas I've seen that have been developed have lacked any sympathy to their surroundings or even the opinions of local people, and that's most of them. There are some that are good developments, but it just seems like things are being built that people don't want.
I mean, we're certainly doing lots of work within the Good Growth by Design programme to promote and to speak to the sector and create a kind of call to action to the sector to be ambitious about community engagement, participatory processes. And that comes in kind of a few modes. It's about how we produce kind of design guidance and design research. A lot of the work that we've done is quite focused on inclusive design and the processes around inclusive design, and bringing in those voices to design processes is absolutely the thread that runs throughout all of those pieces. But we've also done work around how we can do more in the commissioning space. So when speaking to the development community, how you can commission those processes. We've got a process note on commissioning co-design processes. I listened into the panel earlier, and the questions around how to do a good co-design process is really covered in that work, and really recognising that it is not an easy thing to deliver. So a client from the outset being able to see, this is what I need to have in place. I need to have the budget to be able to deliver this. I need to have the flexibility in the programme to be able to deliver this. I need to see that there are risks to the delivery of a project.
I get that.
Co-design.
I mean, at the risk of producing a list of duff developments that I think are pretty good, and that would just take too much time. I just feel there has to be a recognition that we really haven't got it right at the moment. People feel alienated, and consultation, engagement are okay, but that usually is at the point when somebody's already got a plan, and then there's an awful lot of investment in not changing that plan, because changing the plan can be very expensive. Whereas if you are co-designing from the start, then there's little reason to change. Anyway, thank you, Chair.
Assemblymember
Can I just add something
yes,
on that? There's
Mr.
something
Oak,
about
sorry, I
people
didn't see
being
you.
willing to give up power in the comments that you just made.
Yeah, absolutely. Ms Lewis.
Just to follow on from that, because you made the point that people from the start, but I think even identifying when the start is on many sites is something that we're not very good at. So for me, I'm a total advocate for the benefits of co-design to people feeling involved in their places, to the benefits to the design and the better outcome in the end. I absolutely recognise what you're saying is that most Londoners that we speak to don't feel that they're involved in the development process or in shaping the future of London. That's reflected in the workshops that we've run for the GLA and towards the new London plan process. I think there are three key blockers to that. One is the resources. Is it actually, if you want to do it properly, you do have to put some proper resources behind it, and too often they're not available, whoever's taking the scheme forward. There's one around timeframes. So if you're engaging with people on a site-by-site basis at the moment when somebody decides they might develop something for that specific site, many, many decisions around that site have already been taken. They've been taken at the NPPF level, they've been taken in the London plan, they've been taken at the local plan level for that borough. And so many decisions are already set in place. By the time I'm looking at an individual site, potentially the capacity for the number of homes on that site, the kinds of uses that are appropriate for it, the scale of it even, has already been determined. And if you're engaging people with that conversation, then you're right that those decisions have already been made. And there is a real challenge in engaging people much further upstream in the development of planning policy when it can all feel very abstract. And it's not like I can say, oh, yes, you said that this week, and then next week we're going to build it how you've said it. We're actually saying, let's have a conversation around what this might be like in 10 years' time, and it might not even happen. And that's really difficult to engage Londoners with. There is also something around the appropriate structure for engaging people with. And I've been working with MHCLG and the Design Council around design codes. I think this is an interesting potential route for capturing early stage ambitions for sites and for places and for neighbourhoods from local people that sets the rules for development in those areas. But at the moment, those aren't really operationalised, they're not really happening. And so to look at individual planning applications is always going to be, even with the best co-design process, somewhat substandard or unsatisfactory.
Assemblymember Murma.
Thank you. Before I come on to my question, just on that to Dina and Holly, in the previous panel, one of our guests said, kind of off the cuff, but actually I think it underpins a lot of what we're talking about. That's why I was feeling a bit like we're talking in little columns of light, which is that basically nobody really wants anything to happen next door to them. And I guess my question about kind of following on from Assemblymember Boff's question, rather, to the two of you, is if it's not the right point when somebody thinks I might do something on this particular site, I don't understand how it's possible to have a design process where people are asking permission to do something at all and then decide what goes on it. To my mind, it would be easier to engage a group of non-specialist people, not with a blank piece of paper, but to say these are the things that are possible, these are the things that are not. This is what I'm thinking. What do you think? I don't know. Does that make sense? Happy to be challenged and be told I'm talking nonsense, but...
It makes sense, but there's a problem in this fictional scenario where the things that have already been decided, the things like these are the things that are possible, these are the things that are not possible, that even that beginning point of the conversation can be quite problematic for a lot of Londoners. So to make this site add up, to make it make the money that it needs to make for us to be interested in delivering this, we have to deliver at a certain number of story height, for example. You may have lost your argument already. And so I think that there's something around demystifying some of those processes. And I've been involved in some co-design processes recently where we're trying to do that. But even that process of saying, this is what the site was bought for, this is what we think we can make with the development, this is what's required to be made in order for anybody to bother doing it, even just those things can be incredibly controversial and challenging. And so it's possible to have that conversation, but ideally there would be a greater level, I think, of community involvement and participation in the production of some of those policies that set some of those parameters. The financial parameters are not within all of our control.
When you say the parameters of what's possible, asking people how many homes go next door to them on the infill site. I'm struggling with the level of granularity that's required for something to start, because ultimately if what you're delivering is homes, if somebody says they would like to have on a X-sized footprint of a site between two blocks, it would be preferable to have something which is not taller than theirs. Fair enough. But if the need is for something which is 20% bigger, then I guess I'm wondering why that's a problem if somebody says the need overrules the fact that you don't like it.
I think it does, and I think that's part of the alienation that Londoners feel from the design process, is that I think the unacceptable developments that have been referenced by other Assembly members have that exact dynamic. It's like, well, this is what it needs to be, so that's what it's going to be anyway.
I will move on to Dina, but I guess what I'm saying is I don't think that is unacceptable to Londoners in the broader context of what's happening. I really don't. I think, again, the subjectivity around beauty, I think that is, for me, and I would hope for many other people, is an acceptable trade-off. You still get the thing that you want, but you must compromise by adding 20% on top. But, yeah.
I think that's where I'd say the deliberative workshop process allows you to have those conversations, but it takes time. So you'd have those conversations with saying to people, this is what the planning policy says that has to be delivered here. This is why. Now let's all sit down together and work out what the best way of achieving those things would be. There is then somebody owns the land. You may want to even at that point throw in, and they paid this much for the land. If you want to have that conversation, but you would need to be able to have the time to have the conversation and work through what the issues are. I think the experience from the feedback from the community conversations that the London Housing Panel has done is that people don't necessarily say, I don't want a 10-storey block next to me, if they've been involved in thinking about why that needs to be done. But they might want to say, we'd quite like it to be 12 stories over there and 9 stories or 8 stories over there. They might actually challenge some of the it's got to be X from some of the professionals, because it doesn't always have to be X. Professionals have sort of got to that position. If they were then taken back to the first principles to think through what the solution, which it's finding solution, problem solving, that's design. I do go back to the previous point about good design working. I think your argument, well, both the comment that both of you are making in terms of the point at which you involve people. The London Housing Panel coordinated, brought together people to have the conversation about the London plan and submitted our thoughts, their thoughts, not our thoughts. But that needed people to understand, and a lot of people are saying, okay, so what's happening with it now? You know, I commented on this 2 years ago. What's happening? And potentially that is difficult for people to understand the length of time that these processes take. Possibly local neighbourhood plans could be an alternative, particularly neighbourhood plans that could designate land use. To actually say, well, we'll have this conversation up here in principle. We'll ask the policy writers to think about inclusive design when they're thinking about character areas, whatever, in design codes. We'll ask them to think about how usable is the space for all the different people from different protected characteristics, because they'll use their technical knowledge to do this if we give them solve this problem. But neighbourhood plans as a mechanism for then working both ways with local plans, up and down. I know neighbourhood plan has to be broadly in consistency with but it can also influence. And so through a process of saying, well, here's a neighbourhood, let's all work together on working out what it is that this place should have, how we want it to be, you give people something solid to hold on to in terms of doing some of that more theoretical thinking about well, what does 10% accessible homes look like? One thing I was going to say at some point, I might as well say it now, is the concern that quite a lot of the panel members have in terms of accessible homes only being in the sale market rather than in the affordable homes. But it's the neighbourhood planning, concept planning are good techniques, I think, for actually engaging people at a level up from that particular site to actually think about what do we want here.
Thank you. Thank you very much to both of you. It's really helpful. Now to my actual question. To Sarah and to Karen as well, actually. So I'll put them together if I can. So the current GLA initiatives like the Good Growth by Design programme, how do they address economic and practical realities that drive developers towards simpler and cheaper design? So maybe if we start with Sarah on that one.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I mean, the Good Growth by Design programme is quite a broad-reaching programme, and it's very much directed towards the development sector and to the design community. So those who are sort of delivering new development in London, and it's sort of broad-ranging in its nature. So it's picking up lots of different ways in which we can engage with that community towards kind of positive outcomes in terms of quality and inclusion. And it's leaning into sort of different responsibilities of the GLA and of the Mayor. So both looking at the kind of planning powers of the Mayor. So what can we do to inform the direction of travel of planning policy, although it would be clear that the Good Growth by Design programme sits outside of statutory planning policy, and how we can inform the development management process and add commentary into development management decisions. But it also speaks really clearly to the kind of commissioning role of the Mayor and the idea that there is direct delivery into the built environment by the Mayor. So what can we do? How can we put in place the right processes and procedures to make sure that that's being spent well and delivered well? And then a kind of broader advocacy role and how we engage with the sector. So the programme is a relatively modest programme in terms of its budget, but it's supported by a cohort of Mayor's design advocates. Holly is one of our Mayor's design advocates who are industry experts. They cover architecture, urban design, landscape architecture, community engagement, a really broad range of expertise. So they really help to kind of ensure that we have that impact across the programme.
Okay, thank you. And Marissa, would you like to? You don't have to, but...
No, that's fine. I just thought you had addressed Karen, was all.
Oh, sorry, I meant Karen and Marissa, so maybe let's start with...
Karen.
No, that's okay. I think I probably, to be honest, don't have much to add to kind of what Sarah's explained about the process, but I think what I draw out of that is the importance about what others have been talking about and where you engage in the process, and particularly in that kind of plan making, early engagement, understanding what those parameters for the sites are. And I think that's where the Good Growth by Design programme really supports, I would say, local authorities to draw on and access those skills. And that really benefits when you're talking to communities about maybe what the potential for this huge new development might be. You're also picking up the kind of local concerns and local issues, and maybe there's some small improvements to an existing high street, or maybe there's a community facility there that you need to think about as being kind of an anchor throughout the process of change. So I think it's, for me, because I've originally come from a local authority background, the kind of whole objectives around good growth and how they're supported out of City Hall is that additional resource and process expertise to those, let's be honest, quite resource-constrained local authorities who I think would always want to do more. But as Holly was saying, by the time you get to the application being submitted on, a lot of decisions have been made. So it's actually about where those resources ensure that people are engaged much, much earlier in the process, I think.
Okay. Thank you. And then Marissa.
I would only add the points around the programme and its pillars around ensuring quality, championing and learning, so creating those efficiencies with in-house knowledge and what already is part of the process. So not much more really to add than what Sarah has said.
Okay, thank you. And then to the three of you as well, again, we'll go this way this time. In your opinion, what policy levers could incentivise investment in better aesthetics? So could the GLA, incentivise schemes that meet higher design standards, maybe density bonuses, reduced planning fees, that kind of thing? Is there something to get people to think about, obviously, the functionality of a building, but also thinking about the aesthetics? I mean, I obviously have my view that it's all very subjective. It depends what you like. But are there ways around squaring that circle?
So incentivising good design outside of understanding the needs of the communities that we're building for. And I think the point and the purpose that we're here for in terms of understanding who we are delivering for, that's quite key. So if there isn't a market, if there isn't an interest in what developers are designing, then that will be difficult in order to progress any delivery, etc. But to bring those, it's essentially what we're talking about, to bring in those people who will be living in those homes in itself is a huge incentive. And there is so much work that through the development management process, right from planning policy through to delivery, that we see all stakeholders playing a part in that. Again, the difficulty and the point that we keep going back on perhaps is that diversity and making sure that we're hitting on, or we're able to hit on as many of those priorities as possible. So I think the incentive itself is why we're here. How do we engage and bring those people who will be living in those homes and engaging in those spaces, how do we bring them into the process?
I think for me, it's an interesting word to use, aesthetics or preferences, when you're talking about design from a planning perspective, because I think fundamentally what we're talking about today is functionality and diversity and usability. So I personally, I would be a little bit uncomfortable thinking about incentivizing for particular preference or particular taste, because I think the policies that are in the London Plan, and I wasn't involved in writing this, so I can say this, they are very good in terms of setting a clear outcomes-based approach to design that works for Londoners. That's what those good growth objectives at the start of the plan are about as well. It's setting that baseline standard and expectation about what design quality looks like in London. But as Sarah mentioned at the beginning, London is an incredibly diverse, characterful city. It has a lot of varied contexts. There's also a lot of similarities, but fundamentally, what's right in one location is driven by the specific circumstances of that site and that area. So I think having those really clear outcomes-based policies that tell you what your design should achieve, that encourage that inclusive design process that really makes you think about the longevity and the overall functionality of the scheme as you're designing it, is the incentive that's needed for good design for me.
I guess I would just like to add the point that there's work beyond the policy space to help to incentivise good design outcomes. And I think the way that I often think about it is sort of tracking along a project's programme and what can happen at various stages along a project's programme to make sure that we get the best design outcome. And of course, policy coming up front to set that framework is key to that. But there's so much more to it on top of that. So I think things like what we do around, procuring the best architects and designers. Like, we're so lucky to have such an incredibly rich architecture and design scene in London and in the UK. So how do we use the best architects for a site? How do we embed design review as part of the kind of development process? How do we ensure that, what work can we do to ensure that there's the right design, urban design expertise in boroughs to help move these things along? How can we do more in terms of looking at post-occupancy evaluation to inform what happens in the future? So I guess the point I would make, just to complement what my colleagues have said, is that there's a huge amount of kind of process and support that we have put in place and can do more to put in place to support whatever the right design solution is for a place or space or community that isn't just about aesthetics, but it's about the right outcomes.
One of the things that's just sort of popped into my mind, and I don't know how helpful this is to you here, is just more of a just sort of thought about how we've got to a place in the UK, and particularly in London, where most of our housing is designed speculatively, and it's not designed with and for the people who are going to be living there, as opposed to, again, European examples, but having been involved in some of the community-led housing schemes in London that have been built, when you're working with the people who are going to be living there, they do make quite, not radically different, but they do make quite different decisions. Although I can say that on the Russ scheme down in Lewisham, there were a lot of thoughts that were coming up through some of the co-design, through the cooperative design approaches in the early days, and we were able to say, yep, no, that's fine, that's in the London plan, tick, 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 to a lot of things. But then there were some other things, and it may just be that particular group of people, I don't know, but having a shared laundry was something everybody wanted to protect when push came to shove in terms of the deliverability and whether we could afford to do things. So I just want to explore maybe a little bit more how much of what we do through our planning system in London is driven because of the speculative nature of the housing, and whether a solution in terms of the incentives that you're talking about, if you think about some of the places like Freiburg or there's another one in Germany that I can't remember the name of, where the local authority produced concept plans and then arranged for the different parcels of land to be bid for, but against a very clear set of concepts. And that was partly the aesthetic, but not hugely. It was more, what is that building going to achieve? What are the outcomes that those buildings are going to achieve? But the overall framework had been worked through by the local authority before the individual parcel developers came on the scene.
Thank you, Chair. That's fine.
Assemblymember Garbett.
Thank you. Sarah, just got a question to you about the London Design Review process and associated charter, and whether, just how you feel like these processes are meeting Londoners' design preferences. And if you've got any kind of examples that you can point to where they've been effective in promoting responsive design.
I think the design review story in London is a very positive one. I think it was back in 2014 we first started sort of tracking which local authorities have design review panels, and through our place shaping capacity survey. And our latest place shaping capacity survey that we published earlier this year showed that all but one borough now has their own dedicated design review panel. So there's a really rich scene of design review panels in London, and I think that's become a really important part of the infrastructure of design scrutiny. It's not the only part, and it's not like the golden bullet, but it's an important part of the infrastructure. The London Review Panel is our GLA design review panel, and it's made up of our Mayor's Design advocates. And I think what's quite interesting about it as a design review panel is it functions slightly differently. It obviously looks at stuff internally, so it picks up schemes that are coming through the development management process to an extent if it hasn't been reviewed already locally. But it also picks up stuff that we're commissioning as well. So there's sort of almost two different routes for design review. And because of that, that design review panel, and Holly will have experience of this as being on the London Review Panel, will provide design review services from everything to like the Tulip, like really large scale, really high profile projects that are extremely important to Londoners, all the way down to strange noises. Some printer, someone printing. All the way down to really, really small scale, like a community garden that's being funded through one of our internal funding programs. And the nature of the design review will therefore be really, really different. And it can go from, being quite a sort of formal review all the way down to being a very supportive and nurturing type of review in which you might be providing advice to a community organisation that have day jobs and do something entirely different. So I think that's what makes the design review panel really, really interesting. I think.
And you mentioned a report that reviewed, did you mention a report then that had reviewed the process? Is that what you mentioned?
We have a survey which has tracked design review panels in London. There is a report that's probably a good few years old now, but it was commissioned by UDL, and it was led by Matthew Carmona, that looked at the value of design review, and I think that was incredibly important at highlighting that it is well received by the development community, that while there's a cost to it, I think it's seen as a welcome cost because of its sort of de-risking of the process and bringing forward any design issues earlier on in the process.
And can you point to just any examples of where the local area-based ones have kind of been responsive or made any major changes? Just anything that we can maybe look at. Just, you aware of any that have gone, and taken on an idea and made a change? Well,
I mean, one that we often point to is Tulip, and I think actually the process, the embedding of the design review panel in the decision making around the Tulip, I think had a major part to play in the decision not to proceed. I think just one final point, you asked about the charter as well, and that really speaks to, it's really brilliant and rich, the kind of constellation of panels across London, and that's very positive. And I think the sort of mantra that we work with is that design review panels are best placed locally because they understand the place. But of course, because there is such a wide range of design review panels, it's important that there's some consistency. So that charter is about our role as a strategic organisation to agreeing some key principles about how panels function, about them being kind of transparent, about them being open, about what they should be seeing, and just a kind of ambition to create some consistency across that very rich constellation of panels.
Thank you. I want to move on to the housing panel. It's up to Dina to talk to us about what concerns that Londoners have raised about design through the community conversation, which I know you referenced a bit earlier, and the housing panel feedback, and just where you think the GLA could be more reflective of some of these preferences.
Well, we haven't got time for me to go through all of the recommendations in the two reports. I mean, we have actually suggested that it's probably less of a design issue, or is it or not? That there are ways of including local people in the way in which the strategic housing market assessment's carried out, and making sure that specifically includes people with protected characteristics and user-led organisations. I think in terms of design specifically, Let me see what we've got. Well, I think one of the things that we have raised is the point about people being more involved when land assembly is happening, and plan making, so that those quality issues, the point that was made earlier in terms of upstream, producing the concept designs, concept layouts, whatever, with people. I think. What other issues can I share with you that at this point? I think inclusive design is a phrase that we use a lot. There's a lot of different views about what that actually means. There are inclusive design approaches now developing, or have been more recently, because it's not just. If you talk to Inclusion London, they would be saying it's not just about physical accessibility; it's all different sorts, and maybe thinking about point about incentives. Maybe thinking about targets to make sure that that we're able to monitor more closely both the tenure split, and again in terms of design that's perhaps less what you're interested in, but also we don't know which local authorities have or haven't delivered on the 10% of all new build units to be fully wheelchair accessible. We just don't know, and we. Sorry. And we also don't know whether in which tenure. So we are hearing that homes that were built for wheelchair accessible homes by developers are then just being sold for more money because they're just larger. So we don't know who's actually living in them as well. That's slightly off your point, but there's a lot more in the London Housing Panel recommendations.
And just quickly, obviously you do really important work to kind of elevate voices of all the groups involved in the housing panel. Do you feel that the GLA is regularly kind of taking on that feedback? Do you feel there's a good way of that happening?
We think so. We have actually recently asked for a very sort of line by line. This was a recommendation. What's happened to it? Because that's part of, as I said earlier, sort of involve people early and keep them informed of what's actually been done with their knowledge, their expertise, and their time as well. So that we are expecting a response, a line by line response, quite
that'd
soon.
be great. Right,
some of it is also about just people thinking, oh, London Housing Panel, we'll talk to them, and doing that on a more regular basis. So it's not necessarily having a report back. It's a culture change.
Great, thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Assembly-Member Boff.
We mentioned neighbourhood plans earlier, and I just wonder if you had any evidence about how they have worked. Who wants to go? Perhaps Miss Lewis, I don't know, or Miss Cons. Right.
I think I can start because I think it's probably relevant to mention that kind of we do, as a matter of course, get consulted on all neighbourhood plans happening in London, but actually, as kind of the strategic planning team within the GLA, we don't actually look at those in detail or respond normally because they do focus on such a local level of detail that we wouldn't have kind of the expertise to really focus in on what's being looked at it. I am aware, just based on my experience across London, because I got a notification from Camden the other day, I think possibly the Hampstead neighbourhood plan is the first neighbourhood plan in London that's kind of been renewed. So it was adopted, I think, in 2018, and across London as a whole, that's the first time that it's kind of gone through the review process. So just in terms of generally on the coverage of neighbourhood plans across London or where they sit, I think Unfortunately, they do tend to be concentrated most in wealthier areas, in some of the more inner London boroughs. So in terms of, I think it's a really interesting idea about thinking about them differently and as kind of a means of kind of getting ahead of this somewhat lengthy local plan and London plan making process. But where they sit and kind of their influence or how successful they've been, I think within my team, certainly at the GLA, I wouldn't be able to give you kind of a firm answer on that because that's such a local granularity.
It is quite local, but I think it's something that perhaps the GLA might consider looking at, because they exist for a reason, and are they having an effect? Miss Lewis?
So my experience directly of working with neighbourhood plans has been more outside of London than it has inside London. But when the potential to develop neighbourhood plans was introduced, my practice did undertake a period of research on Tooley Street in a unit that anybody could come into to come and talk to us about what does neighbourhood planning mean for London and to try and sort of look at the different aspects of it. I think on the one hand, I think they're very interesting in that I've seen, particularly in the outside of London context that I've worked with them in, them very much changing the dynamic and the attitude towards development from one which could have been very NIMBY towards one where we actually have some skin in this game. We have something to gain from having our plan adopted in that they would get a slice of the community infrastructure levy within their adopted boundary of any development that comes forward, and that they can be more actively involved in shaping and having quite a lot of power over that development. So that changed from an attitude which could have been quite anti-development to one where they were much more pro-development and wanting to shape it. So that was really positive. But I think the points that have been made around the communities with capacity to put in years and years of free work to get something delivered, which is still fairly abstract with no promise of delivery, is incredibly problematic, and we see that everywhere. I think that perhaps the locally driven design code process that has been explored by national government more recently may be a more promising one, and it has more resource behind it. Even in preparing for this session, looking up the sort of London-wide neighbourhood plan support network, it doesn't exist anymore because there's no central government funding for it. So I think processes that can have the appropriate amount of government backing to put in the work that's required to get a policy document together, which is appropriate, I think, that feels more promising to me than continuing to ask for a lot of volunteer time to deliver policy in people's evenings and weekends.
Well, it certainly does require a lot of work, a neighbourhood plan. I don't even know, actually, Assembly Member Garbett would be able to tell me whether or not Chatsworth Road actually turned into a neighbourhood plan in the end. They developed, but that was only assisted because an ex-GLA planning officer happened to live in the area. So anyway, I'll hand it back.
Yeah, Assembly members and guests, we are quite pushed for time, so we're going to be quite brief. Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Answer this question is obvious, and I feel like it's been answered. So I just want to ask something else. Is there a danger that you consult people? Let me put it in that way. When do you start the consultation period, and what changes can they make? Because I am now, because of this session, a firm believer that design and consultation are one and the same thing. You know, if you're going to design something that's going to be some use, it would be great to speak to the people who are going to be living in that. But you are, because of practicalities, could very well be destroying community trust, not building it, because what effect can they have? Like somebody used the term land assembly. Anybody who's tried to assemble land, like I have, you wouldn't be able to carry a community in that conversation. It just would mean it would never happen. So at what point do you engage, and how do you manage expectations would be the question I'd ask, if I could just start with you. I can't read this way too far away. I need my glasses to read that.
Well, I think what we've said before is that if you do it early enough and you are open about the information that you have and what the choices not so much the choices can be, but that the scope of what's being discussed. Yeah, I don't think you do destroy people's.
I'm suggesting you could. When is early enough, and what would be realistic to say to a community about the effect they can have?
But I think it depends on the scale. So if you're doing it at a neighbourhood level, then you need to be doing that at pre-plan making stage. And I think I agree with what's been said and hinted at by some of the Assembly members. If you do it at a scheme, a site-specific point, a lot of things have already been decided. So if you are going to involve people at that point, only at that point, you must be honest with people about what's already been set by policy, both by policy, but also the expectations that the person who you're talking to, what they're trying to achieve in terms of the profit that they're trying to make from.
So are you saying it can be done at that level as long as you're clear?
Absolutely.
Right.
And I think but I would refer you to the Sherry Arnstein's ladder of participation, so that you actually can. You have to be very honest with people about what it is that you're sharing and what it is that they're you're asking for their input. Because if you're going out, I mean, I've been at too many consultation events where people have put their drawings up and say, well, what do you think? I say, well, I wouldn't have started from here, you know. And what's the point in me giving you that information? What's the point in me giving you that response? Because you're not going to change what you've spent thousands and thousands of pounds on fees on. But if you'd have actually brought the community in at an earlier stage, it wouldn't necessarily be disruptive to what it is that you're wanting to achieve. It might be, as there might be a complete clash in terms of what the objectives are between the promoter and the community. But there may not be. There may be certain areas where, again, sharing of power, if you are willing to say this particular aspect of the scheme, the height, for instance, is up for grabs, or the mix between affordable housing, social rented housing, which the panel's trying to push for, and market sale. If those things are up for grabs or available to be discussed and negotiated on, and that the promoter is open and flexible to thinking through what they're hearing, then, yeah, it's about being honest and open about that, rather than saying you can change everything.
Yeah, because that's my worry. I've been involved in community consultations where people are effectively fibbing to you, or sometimes the community haven't accepted the reality of, if anything's going to happen, certain decisions are beyond what's being discussed in this room. So it's interesting to work through that tension, because I think that you can get people to accept very large design changes and vernacular, all that stuff, if they are part of deciding what's going to happen. Like, will I actually be able to live here is probably way more important than what does it actually look like. You answer that first question, then we can have a discussion about everything else.
And I'd say, you know, one of the things that we did with the community conversations for the Towards London Plan work was we actually took it away from the questions that the planning team wanted to ask and allowed the conversations to be much more open and go in a direction that the groups wanted to take those conversations in. And that produced a very rich, because they were having a conversation in a trusted environment, they were able to have, and then that was then recorded. That's actually been a really helpful resource of their thoughts and contributions. And it wasn't, now answer this question, tick, yes, no, or whatever. You know, it was very much an opening up of what the question might be.
Yeah, we haven't got time, because I'm interested in the impact and cost and delivery that all of this does, because time is money, etc., etc., etc. But the chair is giving me serious sideways looks.
But I would say the community conversation process isn't as expensive as some of the more expensive consultation processes that have been undertaken.
That's very good to know. Thank you.
Assemblymember Baker.
Thanks. We're about to run out of time, so I had a couple of questions, but I'm just going to put them to you verbally, but then ask if you can respond in writing to them, if that's okay. So, Dinah and Holly, I know we've talked about this a lot, but in general, but we're looking for examples of good practice in public engagement at a city level that you think the GLA could trial, that could offer insights for design, and for our GLA guests. Is the GLA considering trialling any novel approaches to public engagement on design as part of further development of the London plan? So apologies, we've got no time to actually hear you verbally answer that, but if you could write to us with anything, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. The final quick question will be from myself before wrapping up, and it's around the government's new towns proposal. So there is a suggestion that the new towns in London will focus on gentle density, on mid-rise, on more traditional architecture. Would you support similar principles for London's future growth areas, and what practical steps would be needed to make this viable? Maybe we'll start with Marissa and see if anyone else has any contributions.
Could you repeat the second part of your question, please?
The second part was just about what practically would need to happen to make it viable to build in this way.
Okay, so in terms of the rollout of the new towns, the principles are, and as they are developing for London, are very progressed, and there's nothing to say that those same principles couldn't be applied in other parts of London. And again, it is about being fit for purpose and making sure that we are meeting the needs of diverse London. I don't know, or I'm not as involved in new towns as I am with the London plan, so a relatively new thing for me in my role at the GLA.
Sarah, did you?
Yeah, just a quick point that we've been having discussions internally about really wrapping around the same sort of, complementary to Marissa's point, but wrapping around the same sort of design support package that we would expect to see. So ensuring that we can be really proactive in terms of working with new towns on their kind of commissioning processes, their design review arrangements, wrapping around the kind of expertise that's required. So in some ways that's what we do already. So I guess it's rollout of that design support package to the new towns as well.
Thank you. We have now reached the end of the session. I would like to thank our guests for all their contributions today. The committee has a few more brief items of business to deal with, but in the meantime, please feel free to depart. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion?
Noted.
Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the discussion? Can I ask the committee to note the work programme for the 25-26 Assembly year? The next meeting of the Planning and Regeneration Committee will take place on the 28th of January 2026 at 2 p.m. in the chamber at City Hall. I have no urgent business, which concludes today's meeting.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority.